Thank you so much for making time in joining us at this hour. I'm sure everyone's had a really long week and a long day, so really appreciate it that you all made some time to listen in to us today. I am first of all delighted to welcome you all to our webinar. The topic, the attendees, and the panelists are extremely special because we're talking about something which we all are. Feel very strongly about, we are very, very passionate about, and that is workplace allyship, and our thoughts around promoting BAME inclusivity. So I'm really sure that you're going to value very much the insights of our panelists today, and I'm going to get straight to introducing them without further ado. First of our panelists is Cynthia Davis. Cynthia is the CEO and founder of BAME Recruitment. She's also the co-founder of Diversifying. As a multi-award winning CEO, motivation speaker, diversity inclusion specialist, Cynthia is very passionate about improving equal opportunities for people from all walks of life by encouraging and motivating the next generation of leaders. She's a mentor to young adults via the Stephen Lawrence Trust Mentorship Program and a fellow of St. George's College Leadership Fellowship in Windsor. She's also chair for the board for Pop-Up, a social enterprise working in collaboration with educational, literary and cultural organizations to enable children, empower teachers, and engaging family from all walks of life. Cynthia founded BAME Recruitment in 2015, and she later co-founded Diversifying in 2019. She's very, very committed to delivering inclusive recruitment, consulting, and event services, and is helping businesses reach more qualified candidates from diverse communities and other underrepresented groups. She's very dedicated to aligning candidates to the right organizations with inclusive cultures. And I myself am really, really proud that we do some great work with her here at Avanade. So Cynthia, thank you very much and welcome on board. Our next panelist is Laura Hall-Williams. Laura works at Avanade. She's an organization change management. And in her role at Avanade, she helps clients in assessing and scoping out technological transformations and organization changes. She's an advocate for all things diversity and inclusion related, very passionate about building awareness and creating spaces at work where everyone is comfortable being their authentic selves. Laura, outside of a very, very busy work schedule, is the founder and co-chair of Avanade's BAME Employee Network. She also leads the Accelerate Development stream and as part of a global task force focused on race and inclusion, and is also a mental health ally. So Laura, thank you very much for your time. I particularly know how crazy it is for you the whole day, and you probably want to, shut down from work. So really appreciate it. Thank you. Jed is next on our panel, and Jed is also somebody at Avanade who is currently the Global Data and AI Partner Ecosystem Lead. He's also an executive partner for the Beyond BAME Group and is involved in a number of I&D initiatives, including raising awareness for mental health and learning disabilities, creating new ideas to drive BAME messaging, and finding new avenues through which to amplify it. All in all, driving our company's agenda and bringing BAME issues to light to global leadership teams. Alongside partners such as Microsoft, Blue Prism, UiPath, Databricks, and the Alan Turing Institute, Jed formed an AI for Human Impact community for senior leaders to meet up and tackle tough global issues via 5 pillars. The 5 pillars being equality, inclusion and diversity, ethics and governance, COVID-19 responses, tech for social good, and sustainability. So Jed, thank you very much. Your insights and your answers today are going to be very, very valuable given your experience and expertise. We then have Michael. Just before this call, I asked him how to pronounce his surname, and I've completely forgotten. So clearly I'm nervous. So I'm just going to leave Michael. Is a transformational life coach and co-creator of Queer Community magazine. He's an active ambassador for equality, diversion, and inclusive. And as the Rainbow Coach, Michael supports his clients in creating the life that they imagine for themselves and gain a better sense of self. With a background in diversity and inclusion and having volunteered as head of stage for Bi Pride UK, Michael recognizes the importance of raising awareness and is an activist for change. The magazine that he's a co-creator of was launched to amplify the voices of the LGBTQ plus community and its allies in order to educate people about their experiences with a focus on issues affecting the queer community today. We will provide you details of the website as well in our chat shortly. And as for me, I'm going to be quick. So I'm your moderator for the evening. I was born and brought up in India. My name is Richa. I've been living in the UK for 15 years. And in my role at Avanade, I work with a number of talent acquisition individuals across Europe on diversity and inclusion and how we can create a test on a journey of growth to maintain and build upon what we already have is our people first culture. But it's not at all about me today. So that's a short introduction. So for our session today, the panelists are going to give us their views and a set of questions I have for them. We do want to keep this session very engaging. So please put your thoughts in the chat window on the topics being discussed today. And at the same time, please keep getting your questions over to us via the chat window, because we will be making time to answer them towards the end. So panel, are you ready? Okay. So this is where I'm going to kick off. And I guess the question here is for all of the panelists. And just to make answering easier, we're probably going to do alphabetical order. So we'll start with you, Cynthia, and then Jed, Laura, and Michael. So my question is that how important do you think it is to be able to be your authentic self in your place of work? And I guess how easy has this felt for you, and you know, what obstacles have you faced? So if I may start with Cynthia, please.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Risha. So for me, I suppose it is very important to be your authentic self in a work environment. You know, we spend so much time at work that, you know, if you're in an environment where you have to pretend to be somebody else, you cannot perform your best. And I kind of think the best roles where I've always, you know, done my best and sometimes outperformed environments where I felt that my differences haven't been held against me, where I could be who I am and not have to pretend to be somebody else or watch what I say in case that's interpreted in a different way. So it is very, very important. And I think you get the best out of people when they're being their true authentic selves. I mean, as an example, I remember working in an environment because I grew up in Yorkshire and I had a Yorkshire accent. I remember my boss at the time, she kept saying to me, you know, put on your posh telephone voice when you're speaking to clients. And I was like, well, that's not me, you know. And every time I'd speak to a client, I was so nervous because I kept thinking, oh, am I speaking in my posh telephone voice? And therefore I was always conscious of what I was saying, you know, the way I was coming across as opposed to what I was supposed to be saying. And that can sometimes, you know, have an impact in terms of how you perform as an individual when you're trying to be something that you're not. So I think it is really, really important to get the best out of your people, is to allow them to be their true authentic selves.
That's so true, and I think so many of us can actually relate to that. You know, one of the things about coming from different cultures is the different ways of talking we all have, and how that may not be good enough sometimes, and that can be an obstacle. Well, thank you, Jed. Over to you.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think bringing your genuine self to work, you know, it is key, but also on the parallel side of that, I think it has been very challenging, especially within the UK, to do that, being of you know, Asian background. And I've also felt that there are blockers in certain industries, certain sectors, wherever you may work, and they look at your name first. And then sometimes by looking at your name first, you start adapting, changing, and then you're not bringing your real self to work. And I think, you know, the key part, you know, you need to ask yourself that question is, are you working with the right company as well? I know that's a hard question sometimes to ask. You think you just got in and you have to change and adapt and so on. But, you know, for you to really bring your real true self to the business and to really help wherever you're trying to achieve, you also need to be, you know, focusing that you're actually with the right company. You've got the right stakeholders, the right leadership. The right values is a key thing, I believe. If you look at those things first, I think those will really help shape you and really develop you and bring you to that, you know, bring you out to that company as well.
No, thank you. Yes, that's very, very rightly said. You know, where you are, that choice you make is so key. Thank you. So, Laura, what about you? I mean, how easy has it been for you to bring your authentic self to work? And, you know, what obstacles have you faced, if any at all?
Yeah, I think authenticity is just a moral of mine. So it's a value that I live by. I think being real is just the only way to be. However, when I first started my career within the corporate space, I was one of the only faces of color. And I think at that time, I was still quite young. I didn't feel like I could be my authentic self. I felt like I literally just came to work, put my head down and went home. So it's not to say that, you know, I wasn't happy. Like, I still did my job and tried to do the best that I could, but I was very conscious of the fact that I didn't really fit in, or that I felt like I didn't. So because of that, I didn't feel like I could be my authentic self. And I noticed a change when I moved to Avanade, which was a bit more open, a bit more welcoming, that even if there wasn't as much faces that look like mine, I still felt comfortable to be myself. And I think sometimes it's not just about who's around you, it's how they make you feel, and it's what the culture is like and what the behaviors are like. And I think there's a difference between professionalism. You know, I think everyone has kind of a telephone voice, and everybody has that professional, not act, but there is a level to it when you go into the workplace, because I don't think anyone's going to be exactly how they are at home, you know, once they get to the workplace. But I think there's a fine line between professionalism and actually changing who you are as a person to fit in. And I wouldn't say so much challenges, but I would say growing up in London and being from West London, I am conscious of certain things. I'm conscious of the way in which I speak. I'm conscious of the fact that, you know, I do have to code switch at times. But I think a degree of that also sits within that professional realm. Like, I wouldn't expect to come to work and, you know, shorten my words or speak in slang, or, you know, be like was, were, and I would speak properly. So I think a bit of it's to do with professionalism, and I think there's a bit of it that obviously sits behind things that are, you know, rooted into processes and the way in which people are and organizational cultures and stuff.
Absolutely. And I think so rightly said, right? Everybody is professional, but it's how open the organization or individuals around you are to just accepting the way you are. So Michael, yes, you know, obviously, last but not at all the least, what's your view on this? And, you know, it'd be great to hear how easy has it felt for you in this particular regard.
Thank you, Risha. It is so important to feel welcome and appreciated and valued at work. If not, it can really impact your motivation, your self-confidence, and even the company's bottom line. For me, choosing to be my authentic self is not always easy. It takes a daily practice. And I have felt that a fear of maybe feeling judged or feeling that being who I am could affect my prospects at work. And so in actual fact, when I did, for example, come out to my colleagues at work, I built stronger relationships with them, and I felt that I could feel comfortable on a daily basis. And so being who you are is so important, and you shouldn't have to feel that you need to hide that or feel uncomfortable when you're just doing your job.
No, thank you. Yes, absolutely. I think again, it's so core to how our output is as well. You know, how we are at work. Great, fantastic. So that takes me to the next question, because clearly there is change that's required, that's needed, and I think I'm going to probably I'd like to ask this question of Cynthia and Laura, that we know large scale change needs to be implemented, you know, in a top down approach. But how can we drive more inclusive workplaces for BAME colleagues in our own day-to-day actions? So I don't know, Cynthia, would you like to go first?
Yeah, and I think for me, you know, it goes to some of the very simple things about being respectful of each other. It's appreciating our differences as well. You know, we are all different, but, you know, underneath it all, we're all the same. So it's just appreciating that, but also creating a space where individual thinking is also allowed, and not have that kind of common thread of that everyone has to think the same, and that individual opinions are also allowed. But if the environment does not allow you to to succeed or thrive, and your differences are held against you, it can be sometimes very difficult. And I think this is something that leaders have to really drive, and I think it's leading by example. It's when leaders can actually show that this is something that's a priority for the business, to create a culture where everyone can be themselves, and they see that in the everyday kind of action that the leaders are taking, that will start to cascade through. If you're a team manager or something like that, the way that you behave towards your staff is the same way that they will also interact with each other, and it's being respectful. And I go back to the very simple point of being respectful of each other. And I think once we can start to do that and foster an environment where everyone is respected for what they bring, that in itself will start to cascade in the way that colleagues are treated, irrelevant of whether you're a person of color or not. It's just really that respect that all of us deserve and expect in a work environment, I think is really, really key.
Yeah, no, thank you. And Laura, over to you.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Cynthia says. I think appreciating differences. If we think about diversity, not just in people, diversity of thought, it adds a lot of value to organizations. It adds a lot of value to whatever that project may be. I also think being open to ask questions, once you start building that culture where you're aware of what's happening, if you don't understand, or if you don't, feel like, oh, maybe I shouldn't say that or whatever, you should be able to ask questions. So speaking to your colleagues, a lot of behaviors, like Cynthia rightly said, are kind of learnt behaviors. So if, for example, your manager on a project, they've not acknowledged that it's Happy Eid or Happy Ramadan or Black History Month, if they are setting that example, oftentimes you will see the more junior staff or people within that team will also do that. And it's not just to say it's for the managers to do, because everyone has, their own responsibility for that. But being open, being willing to talk and find out more. If there's something you don't know, you should feel free to kind of ask questions and get to know. And if it's something that you don't do outside of work, that's fine. But within the working space, if you can see something's happening, at least have a bit of a, oh, that's a bit intriguing. Well, let me find out, why am I saying happy holiday? What is that about? And it's just simple things like that actually helps to build better relationships between colleagues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And educating and just sort of learning about different cultures, because obviously I think one particular time of the month is Ramadan, where our Muslim colleagues are fasting for an entire month and maybe actually coming into work. So just educating as I think plays such an important part. And I know Laura and Jed, actually from a beyond perspective, yourselves do quite a lot of these education sessions around different sort of aspects of diversity, so over and beyond BAME as well. And I mean, Jed and Michael, there's something that you'd like to add from your experiences in terms of the change that needs to be implemented. Jed can go first if he has anything to say.
Cheers. The education is a key thing. Just and also making people aware of different cultures and backgrounds and so forth. And not just the BAME sort of initiative, but also learning disabilities, neurodiversity challenges, whatever it may be. But I think if managers can set up groups and actually drive initiatives within companies for people to feel like they can set up these initiatives and have groups that sort of maybe run outside of work hours or during work hours, maybe during lunch and learns and these kind of things. I think that really moves the needle as well.
Thank you, Michael.
I think, I agree. It's the small changes that we make. So whether it's for the LGBT plus community wearing rainbow lanyards or putting your pronouns in your name, I think also celebrating big calendar events company-wide. For example, Black History Month, as we've just mentioned, is really important.
Thank you. And I'm going to call out a particular comment, and also because it's the first one to come through. So Stuart, one of our listeners today, is pointed out that it's a really good litmus. And I think so rightly what he said is, how can we know of our biases unless we actually dig into them and learn how they form our understandings of sort of common sense notions. And thank you. So please keep the comments coming on, and it's really going to add value to sort of more questions coming through. So my next question is to Jed. Jed, given your current role and your seniority as well, what do you think senior managers can do to support BAME employees and make sure they feel seen and valued?
Yeah, so I guess to bring it to life, it's kind of the initiatives that Laura and myself have been working on within Avanade to really, and we've all touched on this as well, and identifying there are so many different diverse cultures, so many different religious festivals that take place, and what those religious festivals actually mean to people as well. I think for senior managers to, as I mentioned, let people be able to bring those cultural events into the workplace so everyone can start learning and understanding what they actually mean. And it's one of the initiatives that we do within Avanade, making sure that everybody understands, you mentioned, that what Ramadan is, Diwali, and all the other religious festivals, so everybody can actually appreciate, this is a reason why my colleague is fasting during this period of time. So my best place to actually bring them into, but then also to address those kind of challenges and sensitivities where they may think, actually, I better not talk to them. But having that cultural and diverse sort of like initiatives, we can actually bring people closer together for them to understand why people are fasting, why they celebrate Diwali, and all these other great sort of festivals and initiatives and stuff like that. But also, one of the key things is, I think we've just started touching on, unconscious bias training as well. I think is a key thing that a lot of great companies actually offer. We've done it, we've undertaken it, and it really does showcase how each and every one of us potentially may have that unconscious bias as to, I didn't think I was like that. But that's a good thing, to challenge yourself. And I think that's where it needs to start with the senior managers, to actually identify that, and then to have that kind of workplace where it all starts from top down and moves all the way through the chains.
Thank you. No, that's really insightful. And in fact, I think it ties in quite well to sort of almost becoming an ally then, isn't it? As a senior manager, as person at any point in your career, which leads me to the next question, which is going to be to Michael, which is about sort of allyship. Is that, in your experience, what sort of implicit biases may an ally have that they're not aware of? A personal experience you've had or something you've noticed and seen.
I think before discussing implicit biases, it's important for us to agree on a definition of what is an ally. A lot of people might have confusion around it. And so I'd like to share my own definition, which is a person who is willing to put themselves in a position of discomfort to be able to help someone in another community. So therefore, just knowing, for example, Sarah from IT is not being an ally. Reading Michelle Obama's great book called Becoming is also not being an ally. It's putting yourself in a position of discomfort. Therefore, implicit biases that an ally might have is not being aware of their own privilege. So it's important for them to check their own privilege and understand how their experiences might be different to someone from the BAME community, to unlearn white supremacy and just read and educate themselves around that. I think another bias that an ally might have is assuming that racism is a BAME problem. Racism is the problem of the oppressor, not those who are actually oppressed. It's not their responsibility to be readily available to educate other people, to share their experiences. It's important for them it's important for the ally to be there to support, not ask the oppressed for help. The last point that I think is important to mention is that a lot of our allies might think that the BAME community are always ready and waiting to have conversations about racism, which is not always the case. And so I think it's important to be conscious of the topic itself and the levity of it, and that one should always ask for consent if one is going to have these conversations, so that you're aware of that person's comfort and want to have that conversation, and you can bear that in mind, so that the conversation themselves go deeper. And
absolutely, and you rightly said that it's putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation. So actually almost paving the way for difficult discussions sometimes. And we've had a very interesting comment come through to say, defining allyship is a great idea, but also it's probably advocating versus being an ally. So, different things working for different people. I think they all come to the same goal eventually. But that was really, really exciting. In fact, I myself did not know what implicit bias is. So thank you for educating us all. Okay, so I guess what I want to sort of steer is clearly there are, based on your experiences, some best practice examples, of setting up and growing sort of BAME colleagues and allies and sort of internal staff networks. I want to pose the question first to Laura, given she is a founder for Beyond, which is hopefully going to give us some good best practices. So Laura, I guess my question is, do you have best practice examples of setting up and growing BAME colleagues, allies, and a staff network? And please tell us a little bit what those best practice examples are.
Yeah, sure. Rita, just before I jump onto that, I was just going to continue on from Michael's point, and I was just going to say, well, from an ally standpoint, is also not thinking that everybody's story is the same, and understanding that you might do some research and understand things that may affect the majority, but the majority is not all, or it might affect a minority, but the minority is not all. So just understanding that because you understand one person's story, or 10 people's, or 100, one person may still be very different. So just being conscious of that fact is that sometimes, as people read, or as they get more knowledge and they see more things, they might not consciously, but unconsciously feel as if they know the answer. And so I think sometimes you should always ask, and as Michael rightly said, ask that person consent. Do they want to have that conversation? Just because a person appears aesthetically to be from an ethnic minority, they might not actually even, relate to that, or they might just say, oh, well, I was born in the UK, I don't really care about that stuff. So yeah, just being mindful of that is also quite important. But moving on to all of the great stuff about building employee networks, what I would say my best practice tips is first of all, understanding what the group is that you want to create. What is its focus? What is going to be your goals and aspirations? And once you've established that, I would say it's also good to think about where the company is right now. So depending on what your topic is there an opportunity to actually align that with a business goal? So when you do take your case to whoever it may be, an I&D team or HR, to say, hey, I want to do this or create this employee network, you also almost have a business case. And not to say that's entirely necessary, but sometimes that can strengthen your goals and your objectives, because you can leverage further what the business has going on and what they want to do. The other thing is creating the capacity. So in most cases, employee network groups, they're actually created by staff who already have a full-time job. They tend to be supported by HR and other I&D consultants or other I&D teams who I'm sure, of course, do a fantastic job. But in terms of the day-to-day work and, get fueling it and getting off the ground, it often will sit on, the full-time employees. So understand that this will be your +1 and think about the amount of time that you want to dedicate to that. So trying to find a solid team, of course, is going to be a best practice. Trying to find people that are passionate about it, understand what their commitments are going to be. And this is going to be in terms of time, in terms of setup, in terms of being an advocate for what you want to do. So I think establishing, what those commitments and responsibilities will be at the start will also help you wheel out people who may just want to attach their name to something, but don't want to do the hard work. Because in the early stages, you will need people who are willing to kind of get their hands dirty and do the hard work. And then as you build, and you grow, people might want to become members, and they may specifically choose to be involved in particular events. But as you're building, I think you will need a solid team. The other thing that you could think about doing, which really helped Beyond grow and really helped Beyond, even kind of get off to where it did and get the I guess the visibility it did when we started, is increasing your visibility by having an executive sponsor or executive partner. So as Jed mentioned, he's one of our executive partners. We have 2 exec partners and we have an executive sponsor. For our topic, being a BAME network and what the conversations we wanted to have, it was, you know, quite key for us to have an executive sponsor, because we wanted those conversations to be happening high level within the business. We wanted those conversations to be brought up to the leadership team. We didn't just want it to be, you know, something that let's tick that we have this network. We actually wanted to see change. We actually wanted to know those conversations are being heard. So for us, that visibility factor was quite key. So thinking about that, and if even it doesn't have to be so high scale, if it's not going to be somebody in the leadership team, depending on, you know, what your focus is, if it's something that's quite important, even if it's a local manager or area manager, you can think about getting those people involved. And then I would also say, just think about, you know, what you want to achieve within the next 6 to 12 months. So having a plan. The easiest way I can put it is to make sure you plan, prepare, execute, and don't give up, because it does get hard. That would be something that people may not realize. You know, you have a few events and they go really well, and then, you know, you might think, oh, that's it. It is something that you continually do have to plan and prepare for. You need to make sure, you know, you've got quarter of the way through, you've done 3 months and you've done 2 events or 3 events, you had a fantastic turnout, but what are you going to continue and do? What are you going to continue to do? You know, large areas of silence won't keep your members engaged. It won't keep that topic fresh. So it is something that takes a lot of time and it can be hard. But yeah, having a solid team, planning, getting your ducks in a row, defining roles and responsibilities from the offset is very key as well. And those will be kind of my top tips and what I would say is best practice. Yeah.
No, that's a lot, and that's actually it's really good, and given it's based on your own experience. And Cynthia, obviously, with regards to yourself, I mean, would you have any best practice examples to add to what Laura said?
I mean, Laura's put it very comprehensive, and I remember speaking to Laura when she was just setting up the network, and it's incredible to see how successful it's been. I'm really, really proud of the work that she's put into it. And I think, you know, for me, again, one of the key things that Laura touched on is that sponsorship. It's really, really important to have it from an exec level, because everything that's coming from ERGs and where the ERGs really have an impact is if it's feeding into the overall strategy of the organization. But having that sponsor or partner on that exec table who's feeding what's coming from the networks, because the networks are an amazing resource of information. It's really getting to the heart of how your employees are feeling. So having that ability to feed what's coming out from the ERGs into the board strategy or the executive kind of strategy is so powerful. And I think for me, that's when they have real power. And where I've seen examples of that is especially after the Black Lives Matter movement, where a lot of the ERG leads took it upon themselves to hold the leaders accountable after everybody came out and put the black squares and stuff and said, well, here's what's coming from our employee resource groups and how our staff are feeling around this, you know, and here's our recommendations of how you need to move forward as an organization and how we're going to hold you accountable. You know, so for me, that's the power that we're talking about when we're talking about ERGs, is having that strategic way of thinking. So it's not just seen as a nice to have or a social get together. It actually has influence and it actually has power to drive the change that you desperately need as a collective, but having that direct line to the leadership team to make sure that you hold them to account and that your voices are listened to is so powerful.
No, that's so. I'm going to. I've got a question come through, and I feel like this is the right time to get that answered. And Jed, I'm probably gonna ask this of you, and obviously open that to the panel if anybody has, because I think it is pretty relevant in what we're talking about. So the question that's come in says, what advice would you give to someone who's trying to initiate change within their organization that keeps hitting a brick wall? So, you know, the big strategy is slowing things down, perhaps discouraging, preventing people from using their own initiatives. So Jed, as an exec sponsor of Beyond, I mean, what would your advice be?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is, I know it's not rocket science. Forgive me for being, if I'm quite blunt in the way of saying it, is just to sort of take a step back and think, why are you hitting the blocker? Am I actually, is my target audience the right audience? Have I got the right people involved? And if you sort of then backtrack from that, and then give yourself a timeline as well, and think, where's my focus? Where's my strategy? Where do I need to get to? Who are the key people do I think will drive success across to this entire program that you're trying to develop and put in place? But then also, if you have got someone that's in a senior role, I think and you can lean on them. I think the key thing from any senior person is for them to be able to share their platform with you as well. Not for it to just to be about them, but then to give you and encourage you and bring you up. So therefore, you get that amplification you need within the business. Like Cynthia was saying, within the exec teams or senior teams, that someone's given you that voice to be able to actually start making the noises, start getting to people's minds. Actually, this is really important. I think that would be my advice. Start back to the basics, understand what you're trying to achieve. Have I got the right people involved? If not, go find the right people as well. And they may not be within your own company. That's a good thing. Use the extended networks that we have via LinkedIn and through the other platforms to actually see how you can learn from them. And that's one of the things I've also done as well. I attended webinars and also panel conversations like this to understand what's happening outside of the business and what you could bring in that's really valuable. That makes your mark.
No, thank you. Yes, that's really insightful. And if I may add, I think usually there's a great deal of information out there available on data and metrics, how diverse workforces and inclusive workforces, and what if it is, if that helps at all. And there's some great case studies as well. So hopefully, Greg, that sort of gives you some view and helps you with your answer. So I'm going to sort of move on to my next question, which is going to be to Laura, I guess, and this is sort of, it is to the panel, but I think I'm going to ask of Laura first. So have you seen the reluctance in colleagues, stepping up to support BAME? Well, not BAME colleagues. And if so, what do you think the barriers are? And did you have any particular ways in which you challenge these barriers? And I want to open this out to all of the panel, but maybe if Laura can answer first.
Yeah, sure. I wouldn't say so much reluctance. I guess it's more the fact that a person may not, identify. So one of the things I learned early on, and I was a little bit embarrassed when I first learned it, is that even if somebody is from an ethnic minority, sometimes they don't have, I guess, an interest in being, one, labeled as BAME, or two, being a part of any initiative that has to do with BAME. So again, that advice I gave, whether you're an ally or a part of a network, don't assume just, based on aesthetics, don't assume a person just because the majority might. But I think it's a lack of education, really, or you could say a lack of overall interest. And I think the way in which we've been able to overcome that is by having those educational sessions and by allowing the business to be aware of what it is that we want to put out, and being able to say, okay, this would be really good if we could collaborate here. Because once it's business-wide and organizational-wide, there's more of a push for people to join it, because it's now beyond the network and the members. Your members are already people who are interested, or already people who will likely join your event. It's those who don't want to, or feel like they don't have the time, or feel like it's not something that affects them. How do we get those individuals interested? And by leveraging the relationships you have with your executive sponsor, by leveraging the networks the relationships you have with the business, and being able to make events more company-wide, I think that's a crucial point in being able to capture somebody's attention. Because if it's only going to be based on whether they think they need to go, or whether they think they need to listen, you may not get that coverage. But doing it more collaboratively is where I think you'll be able to reach more people.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And in terms of sort of, Jed and Cynthia, would you like to share your sort of experiences on this particular topic, where you may have seen a reluctance in colleagues stepping up, and any particular barriers you felt that are they similar to what Laura said, or anything that you'd like to add? Jed, if you'd like to go next.
I'm off mute. Yeah, I've seen. I guess Laura really summed it up well. I think education is a key part of it as well. It's actually understanding what the focus is of a BAME group as well, and what we're trying to achieve. I think that's been. I've seen it at one point where someone also thought, "Oh, okay, if I'm involved with this, and it's a group, a bit like a gang," and I was like, "It's not a gang," because it was perception. Oh, we're all trying to achieve some sort of agenda, and it wasn't that. And that's where I think the education piece is so critical. And that's where, as Laura was mentioning, the open sort of events that we were running when we once were obviously in the office and in person stuff, the lunch and learn sessions where everybody could actually come in just to understand what it was about. We had a talk, and someone from a key colleague of ours over from Accenture, one of the global I&D leads, came in to basically bring to life their story, and it was about themselves and how they grew up in the UK, and it really hit home well, because it was like, it wasn't about an agenda, it wasn't about an initiative, it was actually making things real, and in my eyes, that overcame a lot of barriers for other people to actually think, actually, this is an initiative to actually help a lot of other people to amplify what we're trying to do in the industry as well.
Fantastic. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that, Cynthia?
And I'm missing. No, I think both Laura and Jed have summed it up great. And I think for me as well, I think sometimes the hesitance of people, they're just afraid to say the wrong thing, and a lot of the times that stops a lot of people coming forward, because they feel that there could be repercussions if they say the wrong thing. And I think in a world where everyone's trying to be politically correct, sometimes by saying things in the wrong way unintentionally can sometimes have bigger implications. Therefore, people are less likely to put themselves forward to be supporters or advocates or allies, because they don't know, and they don't know what's the right thing to kind of say. And I've had conversations with people where they say to me, well, I don't want to call you. Do I call you a person of color? Do I call you a black person? And they're sometimes almost afraid to ask, and I think because if you don't create an environment that's safe, where people can ask those questions without repercussions or without them learning, then you will always have this environment where people are hesitant to come forward or hesitant to lend their support. So it's creating that safe space and environment where people can learn together. And I think, people will make mistakes, we are human, but correct them and advise them, do it in a way that's more educational and, as opposed to kind of scolding, because a lot of times people just don't know what they don't know. And the only way they'll know is by us, having that open dialogue and sometimes having those courageous conversations and educating each other.
I can't agree with you more, Cynthia. I just want to say from an ally perspective that I think it's important to recognize progress and not perfection. We're all able to make mistakes at one point in our career. And so it's just about making that effort to be better the next time and helping support that community on that next occasion. It's all about the intent that's there as well. And so we must have these conversations and be willing to put ourselves in those uncomfortable discussions.
Oh, thank you. I've got sort of a question that I'm going to pose to I have posed to the audience. I'm just going to repeat that. So I guess there's two sides to this, and what I'm keen to hear from the panel and the attendees, and it'd be great to get your responses in the chat window, is keen to understand any instances the panel may have seen of good ally intentions which translated poorly in practice, or translated well in practice. So I think there's obviously intentions are at heart. We've got a lot in our minds, but what is it that has typically translated poorly in your experience? So I guess I'm just going to start with Michael, if that's okay. I mean, is there any particular thing that you may have seen both that translated well or poorly?
I would say reverse mentoring has been very useful in working people from all different levels of the business and hearing different stories from employees, and that has helped senior leaders become more aware of people's experiences and able and offer them the ability to learn more. So I think I would definitely recommend reverse mentoring.
Fantastic. Laura, how about yourself? And I'm going to be reading out some responses as well. What's your view on, a view on either translating poorly in practice or translating well?
I'll be honest, I've not really seen something translate poorly. And I think it goes to some of the points that people are making in the chat, and some of the points that have been raised before, is the fact that everybody is human. And I think most of the time, if somebody has good ally intentions, if they make a mistake, it is not intentional. It is not to be done in a malicious way. So I think everybody understanding that and having that kind of that culture where it's like, okay, if it didn't come across that way, what did you mean by that? And then how can we move forward so that next time it comes across in the right way? So I wouldn't necessarily see that I can think of anything that's come across poorly. I think it would just be a case of education and having those open conversations. And I think at this point, if you are an ally and you're standing up and you're supporting and you're being consistent, for me, consistency is a key characteristic of great allyship, and it's definitely standing up and being there when it really matters. So if they're doing that already, I think forgiveness is a characteristic that you need to have in these conversations, especially if it's people that are still learning and they're on this journey. And it would be the same for anybody else, because we all belong to different groups. I identify as a Black female. I do not identify as LGBT, but I am an ally of them. There's lots of things that I don't know, and if I was to ever get anything incorrect, I would feel shattered if somebody came and was like really shouting at me because I got it wrong, when my intentions, I know, is not for it to come that way, and I'd rather be educated so next time I know what I should and shouldn't say. So we all can be allies to different groups, and I think that's what's key, is forgiveness and learning and being willing to learn.
Fantastic. No, thank you. So who we got? So next, Jed, Cynthia. Who's going first on that one with your experiences? Cynthia?
Yeah, sorry, not too much to add from what Laura and Michael have kind of said. And I think, again, just touching on that thing about just learning, I think all this just stems from just learning and creating an environment where people can learn from each other. I think that is the important thing. And I don't know of any practices that have really failed. I think Michael touched on one, which is around that reverse mentoring, and I think the importance of that is you get people learning from each other. So again, it's still going back into that kind of learning from each other. So yeah, I don't think I've got anything more to add on that topic.
Oh, that's great. Jed, how about yourself?
I'm gonna throw a bit of a curveball. Probably with the one I'll probably pick up is with good intentions that went wrong. Not where I'm at now, but through experience, I've seen this happen with a previous employer where they've set out to build out their company values and their mantras to what they're all about. But unfortunately, and this all comes to inclusion as kind of key thing, in making sure you actually do include the right people to actually help drive those initiatives. And selective, I think, is one way of saying it. They wanted to have a mantra. They thought, right, actually, we're only going to work with the usual team to build this out, and then it becomes, it's just another mechanism to actually make themselves feel good in a certain way, but they're not listening to the wider group or the rest of the actual business or the company, and not getting any input. So even things like running polls and stuff to actually get feedback, to actually understand what does the company really feel like? What's really impactful and what's not working? All those good stuff, all those kind of key things as well, really actually helps deliver against those metrics.
Thank you. No, that's great. I've got another question in the window, which I think I'm going to go ahead and ask now, if that's okay. And then Laura, I'm probably going to pick you as the person for this. I think given you've been doing some work with Pam on this. So the questions come through and particularly asks about what impact Pam has had on the D&I agenda in the Avanade business.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question, and I'm glad somebody posed that, because I've definitely seen massive strides since Pam's come on, and I think one of the key things Pam has done is empowered the groups who are already there doing the work to have the conversations with people at exec levels and actually ensure that that leverage and those connections can be built and be solid. I think in response to, you know, the tragic loss which happened, and the way in which, you know, the organizations and the world was responding to the Black Lives Matter movement, and the conversations happening around D&I, what I noticed is that people doing a lot of talking, you know, as most organizations do. You're going to put out your statement, you'll do those talking, you'll have those initial conversations, you might have a table talk, and you will assure your employees, you know, we're a good company, this isn't our values and we won't accept that. But I think what makes that difference is when we had those listening sessions and then we've gone on to actually have task force, we are seeing action, we're seeing changes, you know, we're seeing people being appointed as D&I officers. Just having that role in itself means change is coming, and that, you know, we're establishing what our responsibilities are going to be as an organization. I'm a part of the global task force, and I work with some really great people at a global level. And I think just having those conversations and not just keeping it siloed. So it's not just a Avanade UKI issue, you know, it's not just a Avanade US issue. It's about bringing and listening to all of the concerns across the globe, putting it together and really breaking down as to how we're going to make change. How can we impact that concern? How do we change that? You know, how do we build better development programs or tools for our people? How do we listen to them better? What are their concerns? You know, how are we going to look at, how do we measure this? You know, what are the metrics? And I think anyone in a position of power could look at that and easily just put out a statement and say, this is what we're going to do, or when we have enough time or when we have enough people. But I think what's been, you know, very courageous for me is to see Pam literally not take a second to turn around and get stuff in place, and getting things done at crucial times is very important. And I think she's been a great leader in showcasing that. So I definitely think she's had a positive impact on how D&I is seen and the pace at which we move within Avanade. And I think it's crucial, and it's been really great to see.
Thank you. No, thank you, Laura. That's really insightful. And I'm sure hopefully that answered the individual who had asked the question as well. So the next question I had is going to be for Michael.
Richard, sorry, apologies. I was going to say for the wider audience that don't know who Pam is the CEO of Avanade as well. So it just shows to show the impact of the initiative that Laura has started off doing. It's got all the way to the CEO who's now actually driving that initiative forward as well. So I thought I'd make that statement as well, just for the wider.
Thank you. Yes, clearly. Yeah, no, that was great. Please interrupt me anytime. It's totally fine. Great. So the next one is going to come through to Michael. And again, I think probably think you're suited best for this. So as allies, you know, what things should allies be aware of in terms of sort of intersectionality to ensure supportive and sort of constructive allyship? That one's to you.
I'd like to start off by explaining what intersectionality is. It's a term that was coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw. If you haven't seen her TED Talk, I really recommend it. So intersectionality is the intersection of where all of your identities meet, or the crossroads. So for me personally, I'm going to use myself as an example. On a Monday and Tuesday, I'm white. On a Wednesday and Thursday, I'm bisexual. On Friday and Saturday, I'm Jewish. And on Sunday, I'm a cisgender male. No, that's not actually how it works. I'm all of those identities all of the time. So it's also important to think about how discrimination can affect someone in different ways. So someone who identifies as BAME or identifies as LGBT+, they might receive that discrimination in different ways, and also might receive discrimination for both of those identities. And that can have a compounding effect on, for example, their confidence at work or even their mental health. If we look at employment, according to the McKinsey report, for example, the number of women on boards at C-suite level is only 21%. And if we compare that to the number of women of color on boards, it's only 3%. So obviously, when we look at intersectionality there, it has had a big impact on the gender parity, unfortunately. And so hopefully that this is what we're working to eradicate. So I'd like to look at some of the comments today in the chat and see how other people feel that they can be a constructive ally.
No, thank you, and I'll get the responses over. No, that's really sort of helpful as well. Before I move on to the next question, I've got a question that's come through, which Cynthia, that's okay. I'm going to pose to yourself, and I'll probably based on your sort of experience as well of working with multiple organizations. What the audience have asked is that, would you know of any sort of great examples of employers initiating conversations on racism with employees globally or successful sort of networks? I mean, is it even possible to do these need to be driven locally or do they need to be driven globally? I don't know. Did I read that out okay, or should I repeat? Yes, for Cynthia.
So sorry. So is the question around how you can have conversations around race either on a local basis or globally?
Yeah, it's do you have examples of do you know of any employers who've initiated such conversations? I mean, I definitely know of one, but I don't want to make it all about that one one company. So based on your experience having worked across the board with many organizations, are there any particular ones that you think have done it quite well? And I guess the next part of the question is it even possible to do such a thing globally, or does it have to be driven quite locally, regionally? These conversations where we're talking about racism and other aspects on race equity.
Yeah, no, and you're spot on. It's something that happens quite regularly. You'd be quite surprised, and I think especially in light of what happened in the summer, it's brought race to the top of the agenda. Where had you talked about race pre-COVID or pre the BLM movement, most people wouldn't even want to talk about race. Race is one of those things that people felt uncomfortable talking about, and I think what the events of the summer made. We couldn't run away from it. It made us all stand up and face that conversation head on, whether on a personal level or also on an organizational kind of level. And for me, what's been really interesting is, we've been facilitating a lot of these conversations. We facilitated one for, am I okay to name the client? I mean, it's in the public domain anyway. But we a conversation around race for GiftGaff, and it was literally a lunch and learn for the whole company. On there, we had from the CEO or the exec team right through to somebody in customer services who just started on that same day. It was a whole company-wide conversation where we created a safe space that we facilitated and allowed people to be open to talk about race. And I think what we didn't want to do was to use employees who already, the events of the summer were so traumatic for a lot of people because they brought out a lot of suppressed emotions and trauma for a lot of people that they didn't really feel comfortable about talking, and all of a sudden everybody wanted to know their lived experience and tell us about your experience as a Black person, and sometimes that was quite difficult because you didn't want to share your story or people didn't feel comfortable sharing that. So facilitating a conversation where it could be open, it was about an individual that wanted to share that story, and then have people ask questions around what can they do to support, what are the things that they need to know, was so powerful. But for me, it's the first time that most organizations have ever tackled a conversation on race, and what's amazing is now this seems to be on the top of agenda for many organizations that are continuously going on that journey of change. And race is no longer seen as the do not go there or do not touch kind of thing. It's very much, how can we be better? How can we facilitate more conversations? How can we carry this on? So it's not just something that's a moment in time, that this now starts to affect change, that we start to tackle some of those deeper ingrained, barriers and systemic kind of inequalities that still exist. But the only way we can do that is by talking and by rooting it out. But you have to create the right environment for that conversation to take place. And as I kind of said earlier on, it's about not, kind of calling people out for, why did you not know this? I can't believe you said the wrong thing. It has to be a safe environment for those conversations to happen.
Yeah, no, so true. And I think that the underlying message is safe environment, right? Maybe people do want to have those conversations. So no, thank you. Thank you for the response. I guess staying closely in line with, I guess, the question that was just answered. The next one, and I probably am just having a think about this and wondering. I think again, I'm probably going to pose to Laura and Michael. And obviously, the panel are welcome to join in. But the question is, should we be looking in more broader terms, to be collective allies for everyone? Or is it still a necessity to focus on supporting specific groups individually, like, BAME or LGBTQ+ and any others? So, Laura, what's your view on that?
It's twofold, I would say. I think there should always be, where possible, if there could be, like a wider inclusive group. But I think that also boils down to the behaviors and culture within an organization. So if you're able to embed that culture where it is inclusive and, people do like to learn more about other groups and people are taking part, you already have a great foundation there. But having, for example, like a employee-wide multicultural group, that's not excluding anyone, and it's quite inclusive, and you can have those conversations, or whether you do it as a blog, for example, if it's a part of a newsletter, you can have spotlights on certain things. But I do think there are certain groups that there's still a lot to be done. And trying to put it all in one is going to dilute what that focus is. And it also then pretends that everyone's on an equal playing ground and that all struggles are the same. And of course, every struggle is different. And it's not to say that they don't all require attention or that they all don't deserve it. It's a case of, some of these issues and some of these struggles are really deeply rooted, and it's going to take a while to unlearn things that people have been taught their whole lives. It's going to take a long while to be able to uproot things that are deeply entrenched into everyday society. It just can't change overnight. So I do still think a specific focus is required, but I think as organizations understand the benefit in building more inclusive behaviors, building a more open and inclusive environment, that those sentiments will start to become the norm of an organization, so that, it will just be kind of normal to see people wanting to learn more about different groups. It'll be normal to see non-members taking part in, member or ERG type lunch and learns or ERG type sessions. I think building those behaviors means people will be more interested and that they can come off their own back, but I definitely still think there's the level of focus required.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with that as well. And I guess I'm just thinking probably very, very in a very granular detail that, your metrics are probably better. You have to sort of measure aspects initially in order for change to happen as well, whether we like it or not. And that can happen better in focus groups. However, Michael, what are your views on that?
I have to agree with Laura. I mean, in an ideal world, ERGs would not need to exist. Again, in an ideal world, oppression would exist. But unfortunately, I think combining them all together would mean that the different ERGs may not be able to focus on their own agendas as much as they would like to be able to create social justice. So I definitely think collaborations and combined events that help educate other people from different communities would be ideal and very much recommended.
Thank you. So moving on to the next aspect, I wanted to, I guess, you know, get a response on is going to be from Cynthia, if I'm reading this correctly. So where do you believe, I guess, as a starting point, we are seeing positive change towards more inclusive cultures for the BAME community? Cynthia, that one's for you.
Yeah, it's one that I kind of answered with a little bit of hesitation, because on some level, you know, there's some progress that's been made. You know, we're starting to see people talking about this and a willingness to learn and want to, you know, to look at what they can do to drive change, you know, which is great. But also what it's done is exposed a lot of inequalities that still exist in our everyday society. And I think previously this had been brushed under the carpet. It's not that this is a new thing or, you know, all of a sudden these inequalities just exist. It's because for so long people just didn't want to tackle it or didn't want to talk about it and kept brushing it aside. Whereas I think now we're forced to kind of look at ourselves. And again, data, somebody mentioned around data, because we're now having to measure and start to divulge our data. There's nowhere to hide. You know, you have to show your gender pay gap. You have to now very soon, hopefully, start ethnicity pay gap. These are things that are now allowing for some of that change to happen because people don't want to be exposed to be not fully representative. So in one part, that's helping to drive the movement forward, is helping to drive that change. But, you know, with change also comes resistance, that there are people that have benefited from the way that things have been and don't want change to happen. You know, an example of that, I think last week there was a Christmas advert that came out of a particular supermarket, which I'm sure you all know about, that had a family just having Christmas dinner like any other family would have. But there was 25,000 people who complained. What they complained about wasn't anything to do with the family having dinner. It was about the color of the family having dinner. That just shows you the level of how far we still have to go as a society, that amount of people were that offended by seeing something very different in front of them. So for me, on one part, yes, change is happening, but there's no silver bullet to this, that, you know, magically things are going to happen overnight. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done, but we are all accountable for that change, irrelevant of who you are, what level you are, what you do. Every single one of us has a part to play in this. We have you know, we can call out bad behaviors when we see it. We can stand up for those that don't have a voice. So, you know, that's the only way that change is going to come about, is if we're all heading in the same kind of direction, but we're all kind of active participants in driving some of that change.
Thank you. No, that's, yeah, I think that's really sort of insightful. I want to take a question from the audience on this particular occasion, and I'm going to open it out to the panel. The question is that, you know, how do you make sure that employees running employee network groups aren't exploited with the work they do? It can be hugely demanding in terms of workload, emotional impact, you know, emotional labor, and so much more. And there's a fine line between empowering a network to drive the change and just delegating delivery of D&I strategy to them. I want to open this up to the panel. Is any specific person you'd like to go first? Yeah, go for it, Michael.
I think in some situations, the employees create ERGs because they need help, because they need the support from their senior managers, but then they end up finding themselves as the help. So it's important that senior managers get the buy-in as well, and so ERGs hopefully can speak to their team leaders or their managers and get the recognition that they need. And if they do feel like they're burning out or that they're being given too much responsibility, that they can get that extra support.
Thank you. Anybody else from the panel wants to add to that question? Happy to repeat if you'd like to.
Yeah, I completely agree with Michael. This is some conversations that I've been having quite recently, because it's a topic that we brought up part of our global task force, which is touching on the ways in which ERG leaders are recognized, or the ways in which they're compensated because of the work that they do. It is quite a lot, and it's in and above what their day jobs are. And also setting up a support system for ERG leaders. So I'm talking now with some of my colleagues are also ERG leaders in terms of how we can support one another, because a lot of us are getting to that point of burnout. And I think, you know, in current times, there's been a lot of things to do. There's been a lot of things to actually prepare for. There's been a lot of information, a lot of research, you know, a lot of conversations that have happened, Cynthia rightly said, with the Black Lives Matter movement and with, you know, what happened to George Floyd. There was a lot of conversations happening, and if you was a Black person, you was the person expected to speak, or, you know, so I think a lot of people are getting to that point of burnout, and it's, you know, how do we support each other, and thinking about how we can embed that support system in what we do. So I guess that's something else to add as a best practice. When you're considering building an ERG network, think about your support systems, maybe think about doing things on a rotational basis and taking breaks, because just in terms of like work-life balance on a whole, we do need to switch off. And I think we go from work to ERG stuff. When do you switch off and have time for self, and when do you get to be regenerated, and who's putting that buzz back into you? So yeah, that's also quite key.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was also going to add, just to be realistic as well on the actual workload that you can take on board, and not to be afraid to ask for help. I think it's probably the easiest thing. I think sometimes we want to take everything on board because we feel like there's this burden on our shoulders because we've led with something, and it's all responsibility lies with us. But reach out to your teams and to your colleagues and to your friends as well. Be able to talk about things as well is key. Not to feel like you've got all that pressure on you. Sometimes it's good just to talk to someone and let off steam, if it may be. But I think being realistic and having that focus as well is a key thing.
Thank you. We're towards the end of the session, but there was a question that was asked, and I think what I intended to ask the panel next may just be the answer for that. So I just want to read out what the question was from the audience. And the question talked about, you know, that it's so important to stay positive and hold on to the notion that change will happen and we'll start to see diversity at the top. And the individual asked the question and said, you know, the reality is that there is significant underrepresentation. So it can be difficult to feel that, you know, we'll get there anytime soon. And how can one get there quicker? I had intended to ask something on the very same lines to the panel. So probably I'm going to stick with my question. Hopefully I will answer this question that was asked. And that's to the panel, that what do you think are the next steps to securing you know, a fully inclusive, welcoming workplaces for people of all ethnicities? So Jed, if I may start with you first.
Perseverance is probably the key thing you're going to have to really definitely need. Things aren't going to change overnight. There's a lot of things that are institutionalized deep within the foundations. It's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take a lot of people to actually help build that together. So as I mentioned before, don't think you can do it alone. Build a network, build a team around you, build some colleagues externally and internally, learn what's out there through the social media channels. And I extend this invite to everybody that's on the call. Reach out to ourselves as well if there's anything we can do to help you to build those kind of initiatives into those workplaces that to really make everything fully inclusive. Because we all make mistakes, we're all human, and I think it's good to sometimes learn from it, but not to try and safeguard everyone. It's good to make some of those mistakes and to learn from them individually whilst you're doing those, because that will make you, learn and actually direct your focus the right way as well.
Thank you. Cynthia, over to you next.
Yeah, I suppose for me, it's just, really allow for change to happen, because I think sometimes, we can sometimes be our own worst enemies. We should be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So all of us have a part to play in that. And I think, on an individual level, what are you doing to affect that change? And I think when you sometimes take it on an individual basis and we all take accountability of driving that change, I think that's when we can feel comfortable enough to tackle it on a bigger level, tackle it within organizations. But it's just understanding that change will only come when we all are active participants, as I said. But I think that the time is now. If not now, then when? I think there's we all want to see a fair and just society, and the only way that we can achieve that is by all of us collectively going on this journey. I call it a journey because there's no destination, but we have to continuously keep growing, continuously keep learning, asking questions, reaching out to those that sometimes don't have a voice, and be a voice for them. That would just be the thing that I would leave everyone with, is continuously learn, read books, seek people outside of your network that look like you, learn from people that you probably wouldn't hang around with on a normal basis. Ask questions, go to events, read different kind of literature to educate yourself, but it's something that we all have a part to play in this, in terms of that education.
Yes, absolutely. And I so strongly believe that you don't have to be at a certain level or in a position of power to make that change happen. You can just start with yourself, because you yourself can make that difference. And I think the fact that, our panelists are all from such varied levels of experience and doing such different things, and all, equally impactful. Michael, how about yourself? What's your view on the question?
I think it's important to remind senior managers that diversity is not synonymous with inclusion or belonging. Just because you hire a diverse team doesn't mean that they're going to feel welcomed. If you're invited to a party and no one wants you there, do you really want to go? No. So I think it's important that senior managers make their teams feel great at work and feel empowered. I'd like employees to invite themselves and also their senior members of staff to step into discomfort and vulnerability, so that we are able to make the change we want to see.
Thank you. Laura, last but definitely not the least.
Yeah, definitely. I love what Michael said there, being able to step into discomfort, being okay with it, being okay with not knowing everything. Some of my key points is accept that change needs to happen. So I think at this point, all organizations, whether they like it or not, they need to accept that change is coming and it needs to happen. And I think the generations that are coming after us are definitely individuals who are speaking out more, and it's gonna happen. So let's get to it. Have a hard stance on against discrimination. Let's not straddle the line. It's not okay for some because he said it like that. Have a hard stance on it. I think there should be zero tolerance against any form of racism or discrimination that's overt in that manner. Embed inclusive behaviors into workplace values. How can we ensure we're being more inclusive as an organization? How can we make that part of our culture? How do we ensure that people who apply understand this is the organization we are? So if your values and beliefs doesn't fit well with us, then maybe you're not the right person for us. Again, that hard stance and not straddling the line, be quite clear on that. I think it's mentioned before, but just understanding the collective as well as the individual responsibility. So as an organization, what can we do? But as individuals as well, what can you do? And a lot of the time it's really small things. I remember when we did, it wasn't that long ago, so I remember, but a few months back when we did the kind of lunch and learn sessions on Eid, one of our colleagues said to me, just how happy it made him feel that his colleagues were now saying, oh, happy Eid, happy Ramadan. And he had never had that before. And really small things like that, people might think, oh, it's not going to make a big difference. It actually does make a difference to people, that they can come and understand that they're seen and they're appreciated and they're a part and they're accepted. I guess the last view is just like leading by example. So if you have to be the game changer, if no one else in the market is doing it yet, and your organization has to step out and stand up and be a leader, do that. Change is coming. So, it needs to happen, and it might not be comfortable at the time, but as Michael said, we're going to have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and just celebrating people's differences. It really and truly makes us who we are. The fact that we are all different, but as I think Richa said at the beginning, we're all different, but we're all the same, or Cynthia said, apologies. And especially, for example, we work in London. I think London and Birmingham and some other large cities, they really tend to be quite a multicultural hub. So we need to be reflective of the communities that we live in. It shouldn't be, you can go home and you see one thing and then you get to the office and it's completely different. You know, we really need to celebrate our differences and, you know, be able to mirror what it is that we are around and what we see on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, on that really wonderful note, and I couldn't have chosen Laura as a better person to end this with, because you just made my the ending very easy. No, fantastic. Well, you know, I hope everybody who dialed in found this very insightful. I certainly did. And there's so much actually I've learned in this in an hour. So I really hope you all have as well. Once again, thank you so much to the panelists, you know, for making time, staying on for an hour, 20 minutes. And for your thoughts and for sharing them so openly and honestly. And I think we've had some feedback in the chat as well that everybody's really appreciated the very open and frank responses. So thank you for your time today, and to everybody else. And we are going to end our webinar now on that note. Thank you. Bye-bye.